Leather can be pretty expensive, so getting the measurement right is critical. In this video, I'll walk through how I measure a text block for a rebind, and the math you need to do to make sure your leather fits without wasting material. All you'll need for this is a soft tape measure, a ruler, and a pen and paper. So the first step is to have a plan. Now the main thing you want for this is to know your Yapp measurement and your fold over measurement. A good place to start for a Yapp is 3/8 of an inch. You can go smaller if you need to, or you can go bigger if you want to get to semi or a full Yapp book. But my standard so far has been 3/8 of an inch with a 3/8 inch fold over. Some people will recommend going with 5/16 of an inch for your fold over instead of 3/8. In the past, I have gone with 5/16 and had issues when it came to stitching, just because my fold overs were not very consistent. So I would recommend going with a slightly bigger fold over, like 3/8 of an inch, until you get a little bit more practice in. Now, I like to have one section of my notebook being the plan, another one for the block dimensions, and then another one for the math and the final liner size. And then I'll put any notes I may have in this big empty space right here. Now this is really good to have in the future, so that if you have anything that messes up or anything that works particularly well, you can take note of that, have the math you did, and reference it in the future. All right, so now that we have that, let's begin with the long measurement. For that, you need to have a soft tape measure. So what you're going to do is line up the end with the very edge of your text block. From what I've seen, people tend to lay down the text block and then nudge the edge until it lines up with that metal piece. And then you just fold this over, put a little bit of pressure so it doesn't move. You want it to be a little bit taut, but you don't need to like really pull at it. It's okay if it's a little bit loose, and then if you're between two numbers, I would recommend rounding up instead of rounding down. I think 13 3/8 is a good number there. So I'll go ahead and write that number down. All right, so that's the long measurement. Now we can move on to the height, and we'll just use our ruler for this one. So it looks like we're at about 8 5/16 here. It's a touch under 5/16, but again, we want to err on the side of a little bit too big rather than too small, because you can always trim down leather that's too big. You can't really make leather bigger that's too small. So let me just double check this, 8 5/16. Yeah. So now we can get started on some math here. So we'll start with the true size, which is 13 3/8 by 8 5/16. So the first number we'll want to add here is actually an allowance for our tabs. This is needed because of the way a cover is secured to a text block. The way that we're going to do this, at least, is the liner is going to have some tabs in it, and those tabs are going to be glued onto the text block. If we pretend like this is our liner leather, you cut a slit in the center, and then you fold the leather over like this, and you glue this tab right here onto your text block. So you need a little bit of allowance for that. You need to make the leather a little bit wider than you would expect to account for this thickness right here. Now this is going to vary depending on how thick your leather is, but if you're using around 0.7, which is what I'm using, give or take probably 0.2 millimeters, you're going to want to add 3/16 here. And one thing to note is that this is only for the long measurement. You do not need to add this to the height. So now that we have our tab add, we can add our Yapp. We've already established that the Yapp for this book is going to be 3/8 of an inch. One thing to note here is if you want to go with a full Yapp, you may need to measure the width of the text block. And for that, you'll just take a ruler and measure like so. All right, so back to our Yapp add. If we were making a Yapp for this, we would have this height number here, and then we would need to add 3/8 of an inch of Yapp on this side and 3/8 of an inch of Yapp on this side. So we need to have our Yapp number times 2. So instead of 3/8 of an inch, we will add 3/4 of an inch here. And we will do the same thing on this side. So we'll do 3/4 of an inch there. Now we add those together and we'll end up with our final liner size. 21/16, or 1 5/16. 13 plus 1 5/16, that is 14 5/16 by 5/16 plus 3/4, 17/16. So that's going to be 9 1/16. So our final size is 14 5/16 by 9 1/16. I did the math in my head and then double checked it with ChatGPT. We want to make sure we actually write down the numbers and make sure that they stand out from the rest so that we do not get it mixed up with any of the other numbers that we have. Now, one thing to note here is that this is for the final liner size. The cover is actually going to be a little bit bigger than this, so do not go cutting anything yet. I'll show how to add the fold over in the next video. So with that, we have the exact measurements we need for the liner leather. And in the next video, we'll use these measurements to actually cut the leather and start building the cover. Thanks for watching.